hidden facts here. So this is one to tune into. The last one is a little bit of a throwaway or a phoned in kind of one, but this one should be a winner. It says here in First Samuel 3 that in First Samuel 2 verse 35, I will choose a faithful priest who shall do what I have in heart and mind. I will establish a lasting house for him and shall function in the priest the presence of my anointed forever. So we gotta stay tuned to the end of this video because it's about up 2 books when you see this fulfilled. So we lose the arc soon after here, but you won't hear a lot of this preached. People don't really read from Second Samuel too often, and it can get a little tedious reading past where I'm going to go to and kind of like the same place we just were a couple books up. It just talks about all these Robux and uh, I don't know. It's not really my cup of tea to fancy how rich somebody was once upon a time. So this is supposed to be peace. They'll even use the diction of having so many folks, too many to count, and that's supposed to be symbolic for this peace. And Solomon in Hebrew, Shalomo, comes from the word for peace. And we're talking lots of Robux in this game. But I've worked for my last many videos trying to get up to this point here. I'm kind of going to skip over 2 Samuel 13 because I dealt with this a lot a couple years ago. I still feel very much the same about it, so nothing new to report there. But I did want to maybe point out something in chapter 14. But, in chapter 13, this woman has the same name as somebody that Judah had gotten to marry for his wife, or sorry, for his son. She became his wife, and here's the Levirate law. And the Levirate law is really important because you're not going to find much Judahite history in the First Temple, but Judah and David in particular are this sort of second Jacob, and in the post-exilic terms, you will see a lot of Judah, but this is talked about kind of well in advance, 500 years earlier in this narrative here that we're reading in Samuel. And to give you a little backdrop of things that happened before this, we have the book of Ruth, who's this Moabite. And I don't know how there could be fertile lands in Moab while a drought in Canaan, but we'll just take them at their word at that. And maybe it's a reason, maybe it's just kind of a backdrop to explain how this event happened, but nonetheless, there was this, kind of like Joseph in Egypt. Maybe some of the Israelites have their mother be a foreigner. Well, here's the kind of birth narrative of the line of David back a couple generations where his mother Ruth was a Moabite. And another backdrop you have to look at is the book of Judges. It starts out talking about how they just finished with the book of Joshua. So they've taken out the Canaanites, but there's some Canaanites left. Well, it then goes into kind of all these Israelitish, Amoritish uh, kind of people, but more than anything, you'd have to say they come from ancient Assyria, but because if you have which is just kind of downriver from there, you wouldn't have any reason to believe that they weren't Assyrian, except for the fact that um, possibly they weren't getting around to amassing huge armies. You might not see amassing huge armies till somewhere in maybe the 15th to 11th or 12th century BC. This is when it really took over of these huge empires banding together with these. And this is why Jericho is believed to be a little bit anachronistic. I don't know if that would be like Baharum. They talk a lot about in the book of Samuel, but uh, if they conquer the walls of Jericho, it's a little bit anachronistic because it wasn't until maybe later than this period where walled cities became a way for more than 1,000 people to live together when they got attacked by armies of over 1,000 people. And when it comes to Second Samuel, I wanted to just touch something in First Samuel real quick, and that's 1 Samuel 30, verse 14. It says, "We raided the Negeb of the Chetherites, the territory of Judah, and the Negeb of Caleb." And, they also have the Negeb of Mizraim and the Negeb of Amalek and the Negeb of Caleb and everybody. I mean, that these people you would kind of think of as like Bedouins, kind of shepherds that could pitch a tent, knew how to use some tools. A lot of things described like with Tubal Cain's ancestors. And these people were kind of not in the best lands, maybe because of sea people or for whatever the reason, they avoided the coast. And I don't know if there was an envy involved in not having a settled land and having to be subject to raiders and different things, and not inside the walled settlement. But there's a story of coming up from Canaan or coming up into Canaan, and is this a story of Cain? Well, maybe who Cain was, now Israel becomes. So if the Canaanites were Cain, this may be pointing to the folks that were actually Canaanitish, that have more of a history of being Israelitish. And then when it comes to who becomes Cain, they become Cain because of the Judahite perspective. And that's why you see so much in these versions, the seventh born or the later born and not the firstborn. So firstborn, like Cain, becomes a term applied to Israel. Kind of like how Jesus says, these are the children of Israel, and it's not for the dogs, it's for the children to eat. And so this would be the right of the firstborn, and he has a certain mark. Well, I personally believe this mark and the tree of knowledge of good and evil have to do with the law of sin and death, and how this mark was to keep them set apart and distinguished until the time of Christ. And this is where Israelites then become Cain. But before then, you would have Cain being the people that came before the Israelites and the Canaanites, and these would be those that were kicked out. And but as this becomes Israelite, uh, then it takes on this identity with the law and everything, and how David wasn't necessarily exactly about the law, as we saw how Eli's sons were going to lose the priesthood. I don't think it's as Dr. Brown says. Like if you brought to Dr. Brown's attention the messianic age of Isaiah 66, maybe even Second Coming, where you would have God choosing priests and Levites at this time, well, he would say that, well, God knows that there are Levites already on earth, and he chooses from among them, probably based on their lineage or something like that. I don't take it like that at all. I think it's because they had already talked about the sins of the priest, so I think it's about this choosing a new priest. And this is the purview of the man of God or the prophet, something that's very true in the book of Samuel and thereabouts. And one person that had great power was this one judge named Ehud. And Ehud, um, he kind of went in to hug somebody, but because he was left-handed, they thought, oh, he was, he can't be trying to stab me because he's hugging me with this arm, and I can see what the sides of his weapon would be on, so I feel safe. Well, it was hidden under his cloak in a deceptive way because he didn't inform the person that he was left-handed, and so he was still able to, assassinate this Moabite king. And although you see all these wars with the Ammonites, they don't say too much about the Moabites, almost as if they can't report on any true history of the Moabites. But we do have Moabite stellates from before then. And I think this is more in the time kind of like 100 years prior, maybe more, when uh, Balaam, the prophet, spoke against Moab. And then this is something that ends up happening to Israel. All these prophets come to Israel, and Israel is destroyed by the Syrians. But the Syrians were more so aligned with the Judahites, and in this narrative of through the book of Kings. And this is, who Hezekiah owes his tribute to. And maybe because he didn't border it, you've kind of felt like it's a good deal. And the Israel was the same way. The Samaria was the same way with Egypt. They were more likely to form an alliance with Egypt. And, as we would say in John 8, the Judahites said, we were never servants of anyone, almost as a reference to Exodus and how that's not part of their history. So I want to show you how it was supposed to be an ordinance forever, the priesthood, Aaronic priesthood, and how a lot of people are trying to hold on to that when the Bible clearly states otherwise. This is something Ezra had a hard time with, that clearly there's the history of the Judahites that have a certain supersessionist existence as maybe even identified with Canaan, with their roots in Idumea and that whole Ammonite wilderness. When we're going to see here with David, I mean, in First Samuel, you see many times he's living with the Philistines. And what was Judah other than guys that were kind of a mighty group of ragtag soldiers that would police kind of areas in exchange for some sheep's wool and things like that. And because, like I said, you have all these different wilderness areas that overlap because it's not really walled in or anything. It's kind of just um, no man's land. Uh, Kind of more for those who know how to traverse. I'm not saying this is true for like Petra or Ammon or certain cities where they might have had wells or something, but the vast other areas. And there's the wilderness of sin down there. Who controls that? And but it says right here, I'm Egyptian, a slave of Amalekite, and that's the kind of stuff that's going on down here. So David can't fight with the Philistines because they don't trust him, and it's kind of in route to there that his camp in Ziklag gets taken over by the Amalekites, and he kind of isn't responsible for the death of Saul and Jonathan, and so we don't hold him culpable. But before we get into what I want to say about Jonadab and the Rechabites, I've talked about that. And the Midianites. This is that same time period with I'm talking about how Judges is this kind of later book, and now all of a sudden it's kind of Cain and Abel all over again. That there's these two people in the wilderness, and how does one purify themselves by getting rid of the foreign wives, holding to the law, this and that. So this one with the mark is the one that believes in revenge. Avenge sevenfold, they'll say, or avenge 77-fold, as it says about his descendants. And Jesus said how to respond to forgive 77-fold. And that's how you don't make eye for an eye, because you might take someone's eye out and then they want to take out 77 of your eyes. So you'd have to forgive them 77 times, because you're not going to take out 77 times 77. I mean, this is going to get really big really quick. And so their solution would be, the priests of the profane fire and these people that couldn't keep the law will cut them off by, abandoning them or expelling them without any kind of asylums, help or anything, and maybe even take their life just to be sure. Especially by the time you drag them out that city, they had certain rules, like, if you find somebody dead outside the city, it's kind of like, well, it's going to be hard to do the forensics for this, so we'll just kill a cow and call it good. And so it said, then David then placed garrisons in Aram of Damascus, and the Arameans became subjects, tributary of David. This is 2 Samuel chapter 8. And then it says here in chapter 10, sometime the king of the Ammonites died, and his son Hanun, it's very similar to the name John and things like that, succeeded him. David thought, I will be kind to Hanun, son of Nahash, as his father was kind to me. So how is his father kind to him? Well, I would say that the Ammonites maybe even controlled, maybe not, maybe they were always on the other side of the river, but maybe they even controlled. But once you get south of the Dead Sea, the river doesn't really matter, so you don't have to ford it. But maybe he didn't. Maybe the Ammonites never went around that way ever, even though there's no border. But I mean, I think David knew from his father paying tributary to the biggest warlord in the area, because this isn't something that Israel is going to protect. Israel is fighting Philistines way up in their borders. Why would they go way down to Philistine borders? Unless, there's like the story of Samson, that he just really liked to go down there, and he kind of maybe moved a border or something. But they had trouble at home, and they're actually fighting on the eastern front more than anything at a lot of this time. But maybe not in the time of Joshua, maybe, or not the Joshua, but Saul. But um, it says clearly in the Bible that Zeruiah, that's a big name. That says the sister of David. Joab was her son, Abishai, and I think her sister Abigail was the mother of Ithra and Ittai and Amasa, or don't quote me on that, but you got to understand that his sister is married to an Ishmaelite, and their father may not be Jesse. Jesse maybe for all I know is a Hebrew. Maybe he's Israelite-ish. I have no idea. You don't really know too much about Jesse, but it says clearly that and Abigail and Zeruiah are sons of Nahash. So either, and I've probably said this before, that Jesse's name was Nahash. Honestly, I don't think so anymore. Jesse's not. I think he was there for like child custody, and his troops kept a good lookout on the area because he had children there. So the king of the Ammonites lost his wife to Jesse, but maybe Jesse did something really, I don't know. I guess that would be a big insult in the day. Maybe this shows how the Ammonites lost a significant battle or something. I don't know. I really don't. But I mean, I believe that David probably married Saul's wives, and his successor Absalom for a while married David's wives, and I don't know. I have no idea, but maybe he was just there for, maybe he was really chill and he's just there for a pick up and drop off, and he'd have his guard, watch over the area to make sure his kids, are taken care of or something. I don't know. And so, nonetheless, Joab, whose name is actually a perfect anagram for the name Job from the book of Job, who's probably like an Idumean at the time of the Exodus. But, God's still dealing with you guessed it, I can't even think right now. What do they call them? The Arameans? This might be where the name Ammonite comes from, but I mean, these people were right there, like in eastern Jordan, for a long time. They even came into play with the war between Egypt and the Hittites. And what's it say? I'll just tell you what it says. My memory don't work anymore. Amorites. So the Amorites are where in Genesis, when he's a stranger in the land, Abraham, he's finding deals with the Amorites. That's where he's buying caves from. It's like they've got some sort of kinship from way back long ago. And you're finding the most similarity with the Amorites. And then you have the Amorites taking place in the war of Battle of Kadesh, was being set apart. So this is probably an area that's important to them, Kadesh. And it says that it doesn't say that God goes down to Egypt. He might reveal dreams down there or something, but God, it seems to be, he's dwelling up there, because when they come into the land, after the slavery in Egypt, it's like, they're meeting God, and then Moses didn't meet him until he went to Midian, and there's like that fire, and it's like he's straight up telling Abraham that he's going to be a stranger land, and not to come back for about 400 years because the iniquity of the Amorites hadn't yet been fulfilled. So the Amorites is seemingly where God's living. I mean, that's how you can explain why they weren't protected in their slavery until Moses comes. And but he says straight up that I will be kind to Hanun, son of Nahash, as his father was kind to me. Well, when his father kind to him, I'd say that they go back. So not only does David go back with Moab, his grandma is a Moabite, so he's not going to be like, yes, forget Moab. And he's called the Philistines. Ashish was the king of, the 5 cities or Ashkelon or Gaza or whatever it was. Is like a good friend of his and giving him refuge in the city walls. And so he's not Israel, and he is not really claiming to be Israel. Like, he's going to become the king of Israel, but my whole point is that in the Second Temple period, they're not coming back as Israel, they're coming back as Judah. And Israel would be the Samaritans. And so Judah would be the Second Temple people that would write these things about David and Solomon, people that we don't find much history for, and the whole story of the kings and stuff like that, because this is how the replacement happens, that David becomes like Jacob. As Jacob is to the Israelites, David is to the Judahites. And because they were a wilderness people, they didn't have this temple. So the Samaritans had a temple in Gerizim, and this is where they thought that, probably Abraham went to sacrifice his son, and this is where Jacob had his dream, and this is where, all these things in Genesis that we ascribe to, where Abraham built an altar or whatever it was, like, we would say that was Jerusalem, and even Jesus himself would say, because Christianity is to Judaism what Judaism is to Israelitism. Because in the Second Temple, they take the identity of Seth, or that's like Seth is take the place of. So they would say, oh, we have this line that goes way back to the one that was the replacement person. So they're saying that their enemy then becomes the one kicked out, and they become Cain. And the only way to redeem themselves would be to have the law, the mark of Cain, to have this, they'd have to wander in the wilderness as they had until they, cut off the part that's bad. This is how you rid it from the camp, rid evil from the camp. And so Jesus is sacrificed outside, where they would say, like, the goat demons would be sacrificed if you didn't bring it to the temple in Jerusalem. And so who did Jesus come to? I mean, he came to his own in a sense, but his own did receive him, and who received him were people way out in the Galilee. And this happens to be where a lot of Israelites, Northern Kingdom, would go, especially, if it's close enough to Gerizim, but still, around the sea, like people like Peter might have some fishing to do or something, and he can't make it to temple. Maybe he did believe the temple was in Jerusalem. I don't know. But Jesus, he said it was, and in John 4. But he says in Matthew, he only comes to the lost sheep of Israel. He doesn't say Judah. And he's out way up in Syria and different things in different times. But he even goes to Eastern Jordan, and this might be my last religious video, so let me just explain something I've said many times that I haven't explained. Why do I think that either Luke was hated by Matthew and ignored, or that um, Luke either hated Matthew or ignored him? Because as we progress in detail of the friends of Jesus, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, there are details in Matthew that aren't used, like names of people and things that aren't used by Luke, and vice versa. That it's easy to see when you really just look at. I mean, you don't even really have the story of the anointing at Bethany, but you do have the story of being at Simon Leper. So you can read between the lines and see how Luke actually does mention this with the sinful woman. And I honestly think there's a lot of connection between these different Marys and stuff like that. But nonetheless, we have here that the offense they had given David, the Ammonites sent and hired 20,000 Aramean foot soldiers from Beth. So this would be kind of the territory of Moab. This would be the northern eastern Jordan, kind of where Jesus went for when all those demons were cast into the swine and they went off the cliff. But a little bit further inland, where the Ammonites had put out the eyes of all the Israelites. So Israel's supposed to control the land, but Ammonites you'll see, but Moabites you won't see. And so I'm thinking, like Moabites and Amorites are very much similar. So David does have a connection similar to even the Israelites. They all do. They all go back to like Sargon of Akkad and that vast empire. But I probably spread out so thin that they started dividing into smaller nations as they do. This is why the firstborn is such an important term, because if one child gets all the inheritance, unlike Herod's sons, Herod the Great split his kingdom into like this part for Philip and this part for uh, what's the guy's name? Agrippa, not Agrippa, but I don't know. Antipas, is it? I can't remember. So I wanted to mention something in chapter 14, verse 20, again in 2 Samuel. It says, so he's talking to this woman from Tekoa, I think, and she's saying the same thing as Cain and Abel, which is actually the same thing that is happening between Amnon and Absalom, because Amnon is like Israelitish, like he might have been born from somebody in Carmel or Jezreel, or somebody that's. But remember, Hosea said that he will repay Jehu, which is Judah, and his name is Jezreel. So this is definitely the north. So even though Hosea is a prophecy against the north, he does talk about this. Maybe this is an interpolation, not even interpolation, but a Judahite. Because, like I said, prophets often talk about the destruction of their people. And this is becoming a trend at that time. We see from like the Moabite stele and stuff like that. So you would have this template, but you can also add to it too, and so this Absalom is decisively like Moabite, if there is ever a Moabite, because he's beyond the land of Israel, even eastern Manasseh or the half tribe of Manasseh on the eastern Jordan. He's beyond the Ammonites. I mean, he's from way out by Persia. So if the Moabites did get forced out in the wilderness, as the case, then that would be where they would probably go. And like I said about the Syrians, they can go downriver pretty easily, where they kind of all goes downriver towards Persia, because everywhere else is wilderness until you go up the mountains to the where the water is. And so they have this situation where David, there's Cherethites down there and Pelethites. There's all these different people down in this wilderness. Even the Gittites, who were probably descendants of the Hittites, and David went to Mount Olives and he was crying. So, but Amnon represents Israel, and I think that Absalom, being son of my father is peace, he represents this, because we know that it was through the Persians that the exile ended, and as I'm saying, these are post-exilic, that it's through them. Like I showed you last video, they say the Judahites and the Chaldeans, and they put them together. So these were more allied with Babylon, and this would be to the northeast where Absalom's from. And I don't know how many renditions this went through. I mean, Ezra definitely is going to have his hand in here, but I'd say before Ezra, it's probably even more pronounced that there was no sin of Absalom, that he's almost like kind of this pre-tip, like a typical, like a prototype for Jesus Christ, like kind of how these shadows keep on coming up in the Old Testament. And so he's hanging there and suffering the sins that his father doesn't want for him, Jesus' father being God, and so we can say so happily that Joab was right to slay, it makes David cry, but or maybe you could take my perspective. That's so hard to explain because these things are very, very nuanced. Because David has to walk this thin line of being curt and also being fair, and I mean, but it's kind of hard to do when we talk about supreme righteousness of this kind of king. Jesus, supreme righteousness is very simple. It's just, yeah, it doesn't look like it, but you just got to believe in the resurrection, and that's the glory right there. But in the Old Testament, you got to walk this thin line between glory of richness and abundance and still having a contrite heart. And so they'll put in like verses similar to what was about Solomon about having thousands of Robux, but David just might have like one verse that he got some Robux or something like that. So they're similar and different at the same time. But he had these two priests. One was from the line of Eli, and the other was from the line of I think Samuel. So Samuel was like a Nazarite. So in Numbers, I don't know if they had to, the Judahites had to retrofit that. That there's certain rules, and of course Samson is a big prototype of this Nazarite, that they keep their hair long, and this gives them their power, and therefore they can come into the priesthood. Like when it says that Eli's sons, they're either going to die or they're going to get kicked out. So as we see in the prophets, that they're only going to be able to deal with certain outside things like cutting the animals and taking the carcass out and stuff like that. They're not going to get the limelight and stuff like that of the priesthood. And so this is kind of, there's another type of this in Numbers with, the priests that, and the rebellion of Korach, and things like that, of the evils of Aaron's sons and stuff like that. And so then you get this idea of just like how cutting off, or through death, through the act of Cain, really, you can, you know weed out the evil. So this is what they did to Jesus Christ. They tried to apply this law to him of weeding out the evil, even though the Romans didn't have such a law. They said, well, we have this law and we have to weed him out. And it says here that there's a war. So Absalom does become the king of Israel. So this is like having a lot to do with David's self-reflection. Is he the right bloodline? Is he moral enough? So if does he believe he can rule? And his son being even more of the things that he is, being like more foreign, more usurper, more this and that, but in the same way, this is David reflecting, like, in the Judahite culture, you have this super Leveritism, and this could have been something that, and even to the point of, not mixing races, or mixing races when you have to. Not that race exists, but in this framework of the Bible, whether mixing races just to survive, or keeping the Levirate to a T, to where it's kind of like getting a little weird. These things both exist. And so what was all this a shadow to? Pointing to the birth of Christ, and how he is, the right bloodline, and uh, his, he was coming to existence for an expressed purpose, that God was doing on earth, and in all the miraculous ways of the old, but in also a new miraculous way that, affirms the Greek way of looking at things. And this was to help Jewish people get rid of their, judgments, regarding their sensibilities of people's character based on their cultural, kind of belief sets. And this would help, um, assimilate people, and in exchange, they would give up all their, naked statues. They put robes on them, so they look all pious and Semitic. They would use only Semitic weeks. They would only use Semitic legends. They would only use the Semitic God. If you would, give up these fears of swine, and being around the dead thing, being around people that may be around the dead thing, or all these, things that they may have good bearing once upon a time for certain truths, but if they don't hurt you in some kind of way, then there's nothing morally wrong with it. It's more just culturally wrong. And if it's culturally wrong, we'll never live together as brothers, where we don't mind each other until we get over these cultures. And Christians have done this by and large. We've made our societies very secular, so people don't have to, be afflicted by religion of others, so that people can have a choice. And that's what it really boils down to, is it's people won't ever accept Christianity because it's being forced on them. So I'm not here to talk about religion anymore. I'm not here to force feed anybody. I'm not here to even just read a lot of Bible, and that's not what I'm going to do. But when it comes to what's fair and right and honest, and biblical, you have to talk about the entire Bible. To just pick part of the Bible and say this is a truth, you don't understand why it was carried on as a single book for so long, because and became so influential, because you have to take it in its entirety. And it ends with giving up these fears and these customs, and these different things, because those actually keep other people from getting close to you, and other people aren't just bad because they don't have the same customs as you have. So all this being set apart was to lead up to a purpose. So we're affirming it, we're believing in it, that it's good and right, but we're not ending there. And a lot of people will. They'll take parts of the Bible and say this is the Bible. And it's so then Ziba comes to him, and so David maybe didn't do this boy right, the son of Jonathan, and but then one day he does do him right, and he gives him a seat at his table. And it's very beautiful. But then when he's out on a run and he's running to the hills and across the valley, then he's got this boy who's lost everything. He probably had a big inheritance, but everybody's family's dead, and who knows what happened. And he got seemed to be forgotten about for many years until David realizes, 15 years later or something. And now David's got to run out to the hills, and this one act of kindness, he gets his reward back. He's offered so much by this disabled guy and his nurse. He gets tracked down by them with so much food that could have spoiled, and in no time they took a chance on it, baked it all up, spent all this time getting it ready, everything he had, and brought it to David in the wilderness. And then David's still going to curse. I think, his deathbed, he's going to anybody that, I think, like this one son of Jonathan, who's also the son of Ehud, the one that killed the Moabite. Well, so there's a parallel. Jonathan being the prince of Israel, and Ehud being the judge of Israel. They in some way, like Saul was trying to kill David, Ehud killed the Moabite king. And so this son of Gera, they call him Shimei, the son of Gera. And I think this happened with the sons of Saul, and maybe this is a son of Saul and a son of Gera, but it's similar things. It's like, oh, I'm going to curse David because all my uncles and my grandpa and everybody's dead because of him. And, of course, David's not to blame because, his nephew just went wild and misunderstood his directions and lied away. And so David on his deathbed, he's, pretty upset with Joab and for killing Abner and someone else. But Shimei is going to curse him, and David's going to take it in a certain way because he knows he's right. That's what I'm getting at, is Amnon was king of Israel in a way. Israel is first, but they become king when the Judahites take a hold of the narrative, and this happens to the Judahites when the Christians take a hold of the narrative. So I'm not here to espouse Christianity, but if you are going to talk Bible, you have to talk about the whole book. And so it says here that in chapter 15 of 2 Samuel, verse 17. As the king left the city with all officers accompanying him, they halted opposite the ascent of Mount of Olives. Well, this is very New Testament type. This is a type for the New Testament. While the whole army marched past him. And I want to move to chapter 16. We were just talking about this. David Shimei, he son of Gera. This is the same timeline as Ehud. as of same clan as Saul's family was coming out. So David ends up cursing this guy on his deathbed. But he's somewhat merciful. He's like, let him live for 10 more years, then kill him. So away with your murderous wicked man, Shimei says. And the Lord has requited you for the bloodshed of the families of Saul. In his stead, you became king, and the Lord has given you over the kingdom of your son Absalom. So David is kind of in the middle because it can't be his kind of father-in-law who's of Benjamin, and it can't be his son who's even more Moabitish than he is. It's kind of like this. It's somebody that won people's favor and everything. It's like David's always tearing his clothes and putting on sackcloth. So it's like he knows he does wrong, but I guess just being contrite like this is very helpful. But there's these two priest sons. One was named Jonathan, named after maybe Saul's son, and this guy I think was maybe the son of Samuel, who would represent the new priesthood, the priesthood of Zadok. And so Zadok was, a son of Samuel or something, where he's going to be the righteous priest. And this is how David's going to get all his support in the priesthood is from this new priesthood. And as we read in First Samuel, what we're going to see in First Kings a couple books later is how it finally came to fulfillment between these two lines of priesthood. They each have a son, Jonathan and Abiathar. But Abiathar might be more like this guy who gave advice to David. No, gave advice to Absalom how to defeat David. Well, this guy Hushai gave this advice to David that he ended up being a double agent and informing David, using this plan to befuddle Absalom to give David his escape. And so when it comes to Solomon's time, like I said, Solomon's the seventh son. So yeah, we see what's happening to the first few sons. What about the other four sons to get down to the seventh? Well, what happens is the seventh son first dies, which is the first son of Bathsheba, but then the seventh son is the reborn seventh son, who is the son of Bathsheba, and through his promise to Bathsheba, he must be the one to take over the throne. But the next in line, the one with the old birthright, would still had his place. So he actually divides these priests into two. There's like one for this team and one for that team, and they're against each other. Well, Solomon wins out. So the guy who was against him is in a bad predicament because he just went against the king. The prince who he went against the prince who would then become king. So people that while he was weak were against him. It's not going to go too well when he's powerful, right? So when it comes to the Bible, we're here in chapter 16 of 2 Samuel and the verses 23. And it says that now the counsel given by Ahithophel at that time was though one had sought divine revelation. Such was the counsel to both David and Absalom. So he told them, like, let me, I'm really fast, and about 5,000 dudes just like book it and track them down. And Hushai was like, no, I'm going to how about we get everybody in Israel, and then we go out there. And while it took like everybody in Israel to get consolidated, which would be super expensive and super time consuming, he would have enough time to run out and play double agent and help David. And then eventually David died. I mean, Absalom dies, David's son. And I think this kind of prefigures for Christ in a way. Nobody has ever said that, and nobody will agree with me, but what I care. Now David had gone to Menahem when Absalom crossed, and Menahem is like Bahurim on the other side of the Jordan. So they go up to Bahurim, and they ford the Jordan and go over to Mahanaim. This may be where where Jacob and Esau met too, or right before they had met. And but it says, when David came to Manahem, Shobi, the son of Nahash from Rabbah, the Ammonites met with the Ammonite from the Gileadite. Remember, Ammonites had already taken Gilead, so there's not too many Israelites over there. I mean, that happened later. I think that happened later. Don't quote me on that. They took it out of the Bible, but you'll find the Dead Sea Scrolls. Brought couches, coverlets, basins, earthware. No, I think it was Nahash. Wasn't it? I think no, it was Ugg. I don't remember. So they brought all this food. So just like Ziba, the servant of Meribosheth or whatever, uh, you got these Ammonites and stuff bringing them all kinds of stuff. And victuals and foodstuffs. So they defeat Absalom, and then they happen upon him as he's sneaking away, kill him. He's hanging there on the tree. David's super upset. I'm gonna be on here on my last video for only about 15 more minutes. I'm gonna fly through this. So I told you about Shimei. He meets again with Maribel. He had not washed his feet, nor trimmed his mustache, nor washed his clothes from the day the king left until he returned safely. Dang. So maybe Jesus should wash his feet. David should wash his feet then, because the guy is not very capable. And he's super upset, worried about. He gave everything he had to the king on a risk too. My lord the king, my servant betrayed me, for my servant who is lame said to him, Saddle asked for me that I may ride on with the king, but he's slandered your servant before my lord the king. But the Lord the king is like an angel of God. Do what the judge is best. My father's entire house deserved only death for my lord the king. Yet you placed your servant among the guests at your table. What right do I have to further appeal to the king? But the king said to him, Go on talking. Say you and Ziba divide the property. Maribel, indeed, I've it all, and my lord the king has returned safely to his palace. So he's like, I don't care about all those things. I'm just glad you're back. So Israel and Judah quarrel, as they always do. When they divide the armies, even when they work together, they still divide the ranks. 500 soldiers of Judah, 10,000 of Israel. They still, even when they're together, there's a division. They don't have a shared history. Judah is not Israel. But Judah becomes Israel when they take the identity and expropriate it from the first temple and then rewrite parts of it to tell the certain narrative. And this didactic is about the blessings and cursings and different things like that. Well, so the prophets will talk about these blessings and cursings. Let's not get it twisted. But the New Testament is talking about these blessings and these cursings. But the cursings were for those that didn't follow Jesus, and the blessings for those that did. Because it was always about whether or not you believed, the snake in the wilderness. Jesus said he's a snake in the wilderness. So are you going to look at him or you're going to look away? It really boils down to something that simple. So all my videos could boil down just to that. Are you looking at what God's doing, or are you taking it in your own way? The way of sin and death. So I'm not saying I take it in the way of life. I'm just saying what the Bible's saying, because nobody seems to understand it. Here I'm teaching from 2 Samuel. I'm right here in 2 Samuel 21. When was the last time your church went to 2 Samuel? I'm at 2 Samuel chapter 17, actually, and I'm at verse 3. And I said, then I can bring back the rest of the people to you. The bride returns upon her husband. It is the death of only one man that you are seeking, and the people will be at peace. And I'm at chapter 18, verse 19. Then Hamaz, son of Zadok, said, "Let me run to take the good news." So you're talking about the gospel. And what's this gospel? The death of the king of Israel. The death of like Jesus Christ. The good news is his death to David. But he doesn't take it like that. But that's because it's not good news. It's not good news. I agree with David. But when you have this us versus them mindset, this is where it comes to. And it's not really us versus them because, like I said, the Judahite picks up the Levirate tradition by taking on and giving everything to their name. But Paul even tried this with the Christians. He said, "Who is really a Jewish person? Who is really circumcised? The ones that do it spiritually, the ones that the inside reflects that." And so, I mean, that didn't carry on. Maybe it did for a while, but when there's certain people come on the scene, maybe the 12th century, and start saying, "Well, I'm a so and so," then it's like, well, maybe you are a so and so then. But I don't think they were totally convinced because that's why they were called Ashkenazi. Like they wouldn't have a name that the Germans all recognize as Ashkenazi if it didn't have any relation to Ashkenaz and they had a different name. Because it doesn't say that, oh, this was a pejorative that they used for us. It seems to be something that they agreed they used their own selves and let other people use, and didn't seem to have a problem with it. A son of Japheth. And so, and then Dr. Brown, he said in response to, "Oh, we didn't steal anybody's identity," he admits, "Oh, we stole the identity of Ashkenaz." Oh no, we didn't steal the Jewish identity. We just stole the identity of Ashkenaz. So being right in your arguments more right than being true logically, resoundingly conferred upon, and polite and decent. It's just like, I'm right, I'm right. And that's how you read a lot of that stuff. It's just like, well, it has to be this way, and just argue, 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 and it doesn't even have to be true. It's just as long as it's right, and if it's right, it's in just some sort of geopolitical way that you can't talk about other anything else. We got tons of minions that will say, "You shut up about that," because they're just indoctrinated in this belief. And so the Gibbonette vengeance, David, I don't know if they're just talking about some problems he had, but a lot of times when they talk about these problems, it's his own doing. It's the fact that he does have Joab in his camp. It is the fact that he didn't seem to counsel his sons and how to deal with these things. It is the sons' inability to talk to their father and things like that. He was not a perfect person. One of Joab's attendants stood by Amasa and said, "Let him who does favors for Joab and is for David follow Joab." See, this is so confusing. There's so many names. People are lying. I mean, this is very confusing. I've had to really sit down with this stuff. All right, so let me just move over to. I talked a lot about the end of this book. We're almost to the end of this book. I can skip over the Thanksgiving, but before I do and move to Second Kings, I just wanted to show you this verse in chapter 19. And this verse in chapter 19 is verse 44. And it says, "The Israelites answered the Judahites, 'We have 10 shares in the king.'" So I don't want you to think that because it says 10 shares in the king, this is like how they defined it usually. Like somehow Levi, Benjamin, and Ish and Judah make up somehow 2 tribes, and somehow everyone else is 10. No, no, that's not how it goes. And it never is like that. In the time of Rehoboam, there's a similar division, but it's not possible at this time. Like, there's not possible even at this time to have the temple, to have the altar. This all stuff has to be in Gerizim because it hasn't happened yet. It's not going to happen until First Kings. I mean, at this point, he hasn't even got his threshing floor yet. And Zion is completely outside of the old city. And it says here that but now he has fled from the country before Absalom. And Absalom. So I was going to say it has more to do with maybe Simeon being part of Judah, or there being 2 half tribes of Manasseh. But Benjamin isn't part of Judah. Benjamin is here representing Saul, and maybe even Amnon could be considered Benjamin or something, because that's what he represents here. And Judah being represented by kind of out by Babylon way, where his son was living when he was taking refuge from his father, though, after he's became the people's favorites, much like David had done when he became the people's champion, and his father-in-law didn't like him and was angered by him. He replied, "My lord king, my city, which said, settle." I don't know. But what I want to say about verse 44 is right here. It says, "Also, we are the firstborn." So Israel is telling Judah, "I'm the firstborn." Well, Judah's older than Joseph, let alone Ephraim and Manasseh. So how is Ephraim telling Judah, "I'm the firstborn," and Judah is not defending himself, saying, "No, I'm the firstborn," because Judah doesn't become the firstborn until after captivity. So after Babylonians' exile, they take on the firstborn. So this is when Jesus said, give to my children first." He's talking about the Judahites. He's not even talking about the Israelites. And he's talking about when Paul says to the Jewish person first, this is the same thing. That when Jesus went on his mission to the world, when his apostles, they always started right in Jerusalem and then went out, especially Paul. That's what it is, to them first. They're the firstborn. This is the inheritance. But Jesus takes that from them. He becomes the firstborn. That's why they hate him. Because he said, "Before Abraham was, I am." The preeminent one, the firstborn of all creation. So when it comes to the Second Samuel, this is post-exilic, but there's taking it from the time of pre-exilic. That's where this story is taking place. That's a setting. So in this setting, in this narrative, in these quotations of people in this time saying it, he has full right to say, "I am the firstborn." And Ezekiel, being from the first temple, still refers to Oholah, Samaria, as the older sister, the elder, where Oholibamah is the younger sister. And her name happens to be the name of Esau's wife. So that we've identified this by the time of Jesus. I mean, even in the time of Ezra, he doesn't say anything about the Judahites. He doesn't say anything about the Esau or anything. Ezra doesn't. They've already, and then by the time of Jesus, by for sure, because that's what the Hasmoneans did. I mean, and their king, the king of the Jewish people, was Herod, who unified not Rome, he unified all the eastern tribes, the Nabateans and all them. And so when Paul goes to Agrippa, you got to understand that Agrippa they had already, his ancestors, they'd already married into as many of the former leaders as they could. He was the guy. He was, not only Herodian, but he also had ancestry from how they tried to use marriage to um, legitimize the throne. And so this is very much like the story of Herod is very much like the story of Zerubbabel and David. It's like, oh, I come to this place, I have Melchizedek, kind of like Abraham. I come to this place, I have Melchizedek. This is what the king is saying. Melchi is saying, I have Zedek, I have the righteous one, I have the righteous priest. And so they kick out this other priest. And where do they kick out this other priest? I'll show you. It's right before the Robux. And then the Robux section goes on and on. I mean, Solomon's wealth, they could not stop talking about it. And Solomon answered, if he proves himself worthy, not a hair on his head shall fall, but if he is found, he shall fall on his head. But if he is found guilty of crime, he shall die. King Solomon sent to him to have him brought down to the altar, and he came and paid homage. Solomon then said, go to your home. And when you get to 1 Kings chapter 3 and verse 4, it says, the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, because that was the most renowned high place. That was the most renowned high place. In Gibeon, up in the north, Gerizim. Not in Jerusalem, because they don't build the temple until chapter 8. And so when you look at the archaeology in Jerusalem from the first temple, it's Canaanite. There was not this kind of Judahite. So it says, you have also with you Shimei, son of Gera, the Benjaminite of Bahurim, who cursed me balefully, was going to Menahem, because he came down to meet me in Jordan. I swore to him that the Lord, that I would put him to the sword, but you must not let him go unpunished. You are the prudent man. You will know how to deal with him and send him down his hoary head into the bloody grave or something. So David rested, was buried in the city of David. So the last word out of his mouth is like, he's got everything he would want. He's living comfortably. But there was this one guy that cursed him back when he was coming up, and he's like, make sure that guy goes down. And this guy cursed him because his whole family was destroyed. And David might be right, because Ehud, 500 years ago, killed his grandpappy or something, but that would mean he was living as Cain, waiting for this revenge, waiting to be justified. Nobody can touch him until he comes back for this purpose or something. And it says here, don't did I not write it down? I am so pathetic. I just want to show you how it was prophesied that the kings sent with him Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet. So where's that other guy? The other guy, I think Adonai is the son of Aaron, the old priesthood, the son of Eli. And so in chapter 2, I really forget to write it down. It says, the Lord will hold him responsible for his own blood, because he struck down 2 men better and more than just than himself, and slew them with a sword without my father's knowledge, Abner So this is about Joab, and Joab had sided with Adonijah. No, I think that was Adonijah was another one of David's sons, like his fourth-born son or fifth-born son. And so for Solomon to succeed in his kingship, it's through Bathsheba, and he makes him a special inheritance. And this is reminiscent of the narrative throughout Genesis of the second-born being chosen and getting the birthright and the blessing. That's why those are in there. And the thing that makes David moral isn't who he married, how he married. It's more doing the Levirate thing to carry on the tradition of those that he took over, and that seems to be great importance. And this is true in Islam. Like, you can adopt somebody, and they still have to have their father's name, and that name is supposed to be some sort of rod or staff that goes in a straight line back to certain seed or something. I don't know. The king appointed Benaiah, son of Jedahiah, of the army in his place, and put Zadok the priest in place of Abiathar. So Abiathar, here it is. The king said to Abiathar, the priest. So this is the Aaronic priesthood. You can think of the sons of Korah, the those with the profane fire. I can't remember those names right now. You know, this is how the man of God, the prophet, succeeds the priest. The priest is something that's Samaritan, Northern Kingdom. The prophet is something that's of the later books, the prophets. So the prophets are largely talking about Israel, the Northern Kingdom. And from hindsight 2020, you can see that Israel was destroyed, whether it was a Canaanite city or not. But post exile, through the Babylonian satrapy of the land of Persia, Ezra was able to move satrapies and build his temple. And when he formed what's Jewish, and he started writing a lot of these things. And he wasn't the first generation by any standard. That's why we have the Deuteronomist tradition that's older. And but he was like the third or fourth generation or something, and the biggest wave happened around the time he came. This is when I think Zechariah and different people came too, and Haggai and Nehemiah. But if you read Ezra 1, there was generations before them. And so it says, though you deserve to die, I will not put you to death this time, because you carried the ark of God, because he was a priest, before my father David, and shared it in the hardships my father endured. So Solomon disposed Abiathar from his office of priest of the Lord, thus fulfilling the prophecy which the Lord had made in Shiloh about the house of Eli. So back in Eli's time, like, all his brothers died. So like in the wilderness, Eleazar, there might be one line, and all the other ones died. Well, that went on for a couple books. Well, they were still keeping the line. Well, then Abiathar, he is where he was the last one, the last of the Mohicans. And it says to fulfill what they said, where he said there would be a new priest forever. They'd be replaced. And this happened a lot. So they'll say today, oh, well, the priesthood got changed and changed and changed and changed and changed. But we swear we have the same one, just let us at it. We'll be back in business. It's not the same religion. It's not the same priesthood. It's not the same anything. It's mostly getting really religious fundamentalist people and futurists and stuff to support some other endeavor. And this endeavor, I don't think it's right to say, oh, you can't be loyal to us because you have this loyalty to this other nation. Like if you think you're part of this other ancient nation, that's your religion, then fine. But once you do start to be loyal to them, I mean, this is why our secrets are out there. This is why, you know, there's there is reason why people could think that you aren't loyal when you're always defending people who aren't loyal. You know what I'm saying? So just keep it honest and keep it consistent, because you can't just lie and lie and lie and think that you're going to convince enough people. Because it worked for a long time when all the media had the same line, but it's not like that anymore. And no, there's no rise in hatred or anything like that. There's no hate involved. It's just love. I love you enough to want for you to make choices for your own self, and just being different and being opposed to our way is not a choice in and of itself. And that's what the New Testament was written to do. So I'm not here exposing the New Testament. I'm not here preaching, but if anybody is going to want to talk Bible, I will come with the entire book, which has to do with being unified in one people and not being separate. And to tell people they need to be separate, you're the one taking their choice from them. You're telling them to live with a certain look in a certain area. This is the same anti-Semitism that there always was, but it's coming from Semitic people that want to see this thing boil over and come to fruition. They have some end time goals, and the Christians are right on board with it, especially the evangelicals, dispensationalists, Texans, and different people like that. And so, I mean, in England had a storied history with them. I mean, they even had a prime minister who had wanted to put a lot of investment into the Middle East and things like that, even 100 some odd years ago, but maybe 150 years ago. But yeah, a lot of people have strong opinions, and I'm not here to try to make people conform to my opinion. I'm just letting you know that I don't believe the lies, and I'm not here to argue either. I'm just going to go on my own way. I'm kind of done with these religious videos. Know that I don't believe in any of these things they're telling me. I don't believe in the third temple. I don't think it's real. I don't believe in this idea of having a redo or anything like that, or this hitherto history is for nothing. It's all based on what happened 2,000 years ago. I'm not for any of that. And I'm happy to be done with this whole thing. When all is so, I guess the big question I always asked was, how is all Israel saved? Well, because the temple of God isn't physical anymore. It's the people, and those people are going to one day ascend into heaven and make a temple up there. And so, who are the people of God? Who they are? Israel. Israel has been, kept, kind of like I was saying about Cain, with his mark, kept until the manifestation of who the sons of gods are. And so a lot of people thought the messianic age would be they'd be manifest as the sons of God, but it didn't come as they wanted it to, because they ended up rejecting it, using the law, depending on the things of old, and refusing the new covenant. So when it comes to the fig tree, it's like you have to be ready. When it comes to the banquet, the wedding, like the prodigal son, the firstborn was Judah. And so because we are a late tradition, so as a late tradition, the firstborn is Judah, but as we read from an early tradition, they weren't. But in the prodigal son, the firstborn is the one that stayed there, and he goes to look for the lost sheep when he's lost his identity. He's gone into the nations, but he still remembers who his father is. So he's thinking, well, maybe I can come back. And this is Israel. It's not Judah. This is the northern kingdom. And so by the sort of osmosis of people forgetting their identity and stuff like that, even though they weren't first, they become first because they get the inheritance. And this inheritance is by being Israel. So all Israel is being saved. Paul talks about this mystery of getting the Gentiles in. That's how all Israel is saved. And if you think it's hateful or racist, that's a problem, because that's what the Old Testament says too. The Old Testament is about the same kind of replacement. And they'll say no, but there was a remnant that kept consistently, and that's true for the New Testament too. There's a new covenant, a new way of looking at it, but it's still a constant thread. And it was never racial, although people very much did try to make it that. And that shows more man's influence in it, because God doesn't care about those kind of things, as far as I know. And hopefully that'll be my last religious video. I'm sorry about anybody who I've offended. I'm sorry about things I said are rude. I might not even believe them. I'd be happy to walk these things back, apologize, anything. I just wanted the truth to get out there of what the Bible actually says. And I feel like I've accomplished that. So I'm signing off, probably for the last time of this topic. For my next video, I'll probably move on to a new topic. Thanks for viewing, and have a good one.